Sophie Carter's mourning had already filed for divorce from her patients by 6:47 a.m. The coffee machine at Carter's cozy diner had staged a full mutiny, spraying scalding water like it was auditioning for a horror movie. The delivery guy had shorted her 3 cartons of eggs and then had the nerve to look offended when she noticed. And her mother, Betty Carter, human tornado, professional meddler, and self-appointed CEO of Sophie's love life, had already texted 6 times about that nice dentist from church who only has one restraining order. Sophie was late, greasy, and running on pure spite when she decided to take the alley shortcut behind the diner. The alley smelled like regret, old French fries, and one very specific raccoon who had been beefing with her for 3 years. She was halfway through mentally composing a resignation letter to the universe when her front tire hit something soft. Something soft that groaned. Sophie slammed on the brakes of her ancient delivery bike so hard the back end fishtailed. She stared down. There, half buried under a collapsed stack of cardboard and what appeared to be last night's coleslaw, was a man. Not just any man. A man who looked like he had been sculpted by someone who got paid by the abs. Even covered in coffee grounds and a banana peel that had somehow achieved a jaunty angle across his forehead, he was unfairly, offensively handsome. The kind of handsome that made Sophie's brain short-circuit and start playing elevator music. She poked him with the toe of her sneaker. "Hey, you dead? Because if you're dead, I'm gonna need you to sign a waiver. I do not have time for a police report today." The man groaned again. One eye cracked open, a ridiculous shade of stormy blue that had no business existing outside of a cologne commercial, and focused on her with the pure confusion of a golden retriever who had just been asked to do taxes. I don't know who I am," he said, voice rough like he'd been gargling gravel and expensive whiskey. Sophie blinked. "Cool. Join the club. Most of my regulars don't know who they are until the 3rd cup of coffee either. Can you sit up, or are we doing the full, mysteriously handsome corpse aesthetic today?" He tried. He failed spectacularly. His elbow slipped on a ketchup packet, and he went down again with a wet schlorp. The banana peel relocated to his shoulder like it had decided this was its new forever home. Sophie pinched the bridge of her nose. "Okay, new plan. I'm calling my mom. She lives for this exact brand of chaos." She dialed. Betty picked up on the first ring, already yelling. "If this is about the eggs again, I told you dash. Mom, there's a man in the alley. He's pretty. And broken. And he doesn't know his own name." There was a 2-second silence. Then, with the focused intensity of a woman who had just spotted a 70% off designer purse. "Don't move. I'm coming. And for the love of all that is holy, do not let him leave." Betty Carter arrived in 3 minutes flat, still wearing her world's okayest mom sweatshirt and fuzzy slippers shaped like bacon strips. She took one look at the man, who was now sitting up and trying, and failing, to remove a piece of lettuce from his hair with the dignity of a fallen king, and clapped her hands like she'd just won the lottery. "Oh, he's perfect," she breathed. "Look at those shoulders. Sophie, tell me you didn't hit him with the bike." "I didn't hit him with the bike. Because if you did, that's basically a marriage proposal in some cultures. Very romantic. Very old school." The man, still nameless, still covered in food waste, looked between them with polite bewilderment. Are you angels?" Sophie looked down at her apron, which currently featured a grease stain in the approximate shape of Florida and a mysterious purple smear she refused to investigate. "Buddy, if I'm an angel, heaven is severely understaffed and the dress code is whatever was on sale at the thrift store." Betty was already circling him like a shark who had spotted a particularly juicy trust fund. "What's the last thing you remember?" He frowned, concentrating so hard a vein popped in his forehead. I think I was wearing a suit. There were people yelling. Someone said something about hostile takeover and then pain. And then coleslaw. A lot of coleslaw." "Classic," Betty said, as if this was a completely normal Tuesday. "Amnesia. Textbook. Sophie, help me get him inside before the health inspector shows up and asks why we're keeping a male model in the trash." Getting him inside was a production. The man was tall, unfairly tall, and currently had the coordination of a baby giraffe on roller skates. He tripped over air twice, apologized to a dumpster, and at one point tried to shake hands with the diner's ancient outdoor freezer because it looked lonely. By the time they got him onto the cracked vinyl booth in the back room, Sophie was sweating, Betty was vibrating with schemes, and the mysterious stranger was staring at a bottle of ketchup like it held the secrets of the universe. "I don't know my name," he said quietly, "but I feel like I should tip someone. Is that normal?" Sophie dropped into the opposite booth and put her head in her hands. Nothing about this is normal. Betty, however, was already in full general mode. She slapped a wet dish towel onto the man's forehead, ignored his polite "thank you" that is both cold and confusing, and turned to her daughter with the expression of a woman who had just solved world hunger using only a coupon and spite. "We're keeping him." Sophie's head snapped up. "We are not keeping him. We are calling an ambulance. Or the cops. Or a priest. Possibly all three." "Nonsense. Look at him. He's house-trained. He's polite. He has the face of a man who has never once forgotten an anniversary. And most importantly, Betty lowered her voice to a stage whisper that could still be heard 3 counties over, he doesn't remember a thing. Which means he also doesn't remember that he probably has a very expensive lawyer. Or a wife. Or a very angry board of directors. This is a gift, Sophie." The man raised one elegant, trash-stained hand. "If it helps, I don't feel married. I feel sticky." Betty beamed. "See? Honest. We're naming him Lucky. After the golden retriever we had when you were little. Loyal. Handsome. Only chewed 1 pair of shoes. Perfect son-in-law material." Sophie stared at her mother. Then at the man. Then back at her mother. "Mom, you cannot just name a dumpster man after a dog and declare him family. That is not how any of this works." Betty waved a hand. "Details. City Hall is open until 5. We'll get the paperwork done before the hospital bills show up. He'll be your husband, you'll be responsible for him, and if anyone asks questions we just say it was a whirlwind romance that started over shared trauma and coleslaw. Very modern." Lucky, apparently, tilted his head, considering this. A piece of shredded cheese finally gave up and fell from his hair onto the table with a soft plop. "I like the name Lucky," he said thoughtfully. "It feels optimistic. Like things might work out. Also, if we get married, does that mean I get free pancakes? Because I think I would like free pancakes." Sophie looked at the ceiling and prayed for strength, a meteor, or spontaneous combustion. Anything, really. Betty clapped her hands again, already planning the outfit. "It's settled. Sophie, go find him a clean shirt. Something that doesn't say, 'I lost a fight with a salad bar.' Lucky, sweetheart, you're about to become the best decision this family has ever made. Don't worry about a thing. Mama Betty's got you." Lucky smiled at Sophie, a soft, slightly dazed, completely sincere smile that did illegal things to her blood pressure, and said, with absolute earnestness, "I don't remember my life. But I already like this one better." Sophie opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then she stood up, pointed a grease-stained finger at both of them, and announced to the empty diner, "I am going to need so much therapy after this. And you're both paying for it." Betty just grinned, already pulling out her phone to check City Hall hours. And somewhere in the alley, the raccoon who had witnessed the entire thing made a noise that sounded suspiciously like laughter. The dumpster of destiny had spoken. There was no going back. Lucky woke up to the smell of bacon, the sound of a blender having an existential crisis, and the distinct sensation that someone had tried to comb his hair with a spatula. He was lying on a pile of clean dish towels in the back room of Carter's cozy diner. Someone had removed most of the coleslaw, though a single shred of purple cabbage remained stuck behind his left ear like a tiny, stubborn flag of defeat. A sticky note was taped to his forehead. In Betty's aggressive handwriting it simply said, "Property of Carter family, do not return to alley." Lucky peeled it off carefully and studied it. "I appear to have been claimed," he murmured. "That's efficient." The door swung open. Sophie stomped in carrying a clean-ish flannel shirt and the expression of a woman who had already lost 3 arguments before breakfast. "You're awake. Great. Fantastic. Wonderful. We need to talk about the fact that my mother is currently on the phone with City Hall asking if they do group rates for shotgun weddings. Lucky sat up. The dish towels slid off him like a very sad toga. He looked down at his bare chest, then up at Sophie, then back at his chest with mild academic interest. I appear to be missing a shirt. And also several years of personal history. Is that normal? Nothing about this is normal, Sophie said, throwing the flannel at his face. Put that on. And stop looking at me like I invented oxygen. It's weirding me out. Lucky immediately pulled the shirt on. It was at least 2 sizes too small. The buttons strained across his chest like they were considering a career change. He looked down at himself, then offered Sophie a soft, slightly confused smile. I like it. It's restrictive. In a cozy way. Like a hug from an angry squirrel. Sophie stared at the ceiling and whispered, I am going to kill my mother with a spatula. Betty chose that exact moment to burst in like a one-woman parade, holding 2 cups of coffee and a folder that already had the words, marriage, do not lose written on it in red marker. Good, you're both conscious. Perfect. Lucky sweetheart, how's the amnesia treating you? Still blank as a fresh receipt. Yes, ma'am. Though I keep having a strange urge to fire someone named Victor. Does that mean anything? Probably gas, Betty said breezily. Now. Sit. Both of you. Family meeting. Sophie crossed her arms. We are not a family. He is a stray we found in the trash. You do not get to adopt adult men like they're kittens. Betty ignored her completely and turned the full force of her maternal nuclear power on Lucky. Listen carefully, handsome. You got yourself a head injury. Head injuries are expensive. Hospitals are expensive. Lawyers are expensive. And my daughter Dash, she jerked a thumb at Sophie, has the credit score of a raccoon who plays the slots. So here's the deal. You're going to marry her. Today. You'll be our son-in-law. You'll live here, eat free, and help with the dishes. In exchange, we won't let you die in a gutter, and Sophie won't go to prison for vehicular manslaughter she didn't even commit. Everybody wins. Lucky blinked slowly. Marriage. That's the thing with rings and shared tax forms and kissing. Among other things, Betty said, waggling her eyebrows in a way that made Sophie want to crawl into the walk-in freezer and never come out. Sophie slammed both hands on the table. Mom. Stop. We're not doing this. He doesn't even know his own name. You can't just marry him off like he's a prize hog at the county fair. Betty sniffed. Excuse you, he is a premium prize hog. Look at those arms. Those are I used to bench press board members' arms. And besides, it's temporary. Once he gets his memory back and stops being a liability, you two can divorce like civilized people. Until then, Dash, she slid a pen across the table toward Lucky, sign here, here, and here. I already filled out most of it. Your name is Lucky Carter for the next little while. It has a nice ring to it. Lucky picked up the pen with the solemn focus of a man defusing a bomb. He looked at Sophie. Do you want to marry me? Sophie made a noise somewhere between a laugh and a dying goose. I want a nap and a winning lottery ticket. What I have is a mother who treats City Hall like a drive-through. Lucky nodded, as if this was a perfectly reasonable answer. Then he signed his new name in careful, elegant script. Lucky Carter. Betty clapped so hard a nearby stack of menus fell over. Excellent. Now, ground rules. You listen to Sophie. You do not talk back. You do not spend money we don't have. And if anyone from your mysterious past shows up looking expensive and angry, you hide in the potato closet. Clear? Crystal, Lucky said. Then, after a thoughtful pause, do I get a ring? I feel like rings are traditional. Also, does the potato closet have Wi-Fi? I don't know why I need Wi-Fi. I just feel like I should ask. Sophie dropped her head onto the table with a dull thunk. Betty was already herding them toward the door. City Hall opens in 20 minutes. Sophie, change out of the apron that says, I survived the breakfast rush, and all I got was this stupid attitude. Lucky, try not to look like you just escaped a salad bar. We want whirlwind romance, not possible kidnapping. As they stepped out into the bright morning light, Lucky leaned over and whispered to Sophie, completely sincere. I still don't remember who I am. But I already like being yours better. Sophie tripped over absolutely nothing. Betty, walking ahead of them like a general leading troops into glorious battle, called back over her shoulder. That's the spirit, kids. Now smile for the security cameras. We're about to make this legal. And somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. It sounded suspiciously like laughter. Sophie should have said no. In fact, Sophie had said no. Twice. Out loud. With hand gestures. But then Jake, I cheated with the hostess and still thinks he's the prize. Thompson had smirked through the phone and said, come on, sophomore, don't be bitter. Come celebrate me and Vanessa. It'll be good for you to see how the other half lives. And Sophie, who had the self-preservation instincts of a moth at a bug zapper, had replied, fine. But I'm bringing my husband. There was a long silence. Then Jake laughed so hard he snorted. You got married? To who? The guy who refills the napkin dispensers. You'll see, Sophie said, and hung up with the grim satisfaction of someone lighting a fuse and walking away. 2 hours later, Sophie stood in front of the only full-length mirror in the diner apartment, which was actually just a cracked piece of reflective metal propped against the water heater, and stared at herself in the least stained dress she owned. It was black, simple, and had survived 3 funerals and 1 very regrettable karaoke night. Lucky appeared behind her, wearing the one decent button-down Betty had dug out of a donation bin and ironed within an inch of its life. He looked like a Disney prince who had gotten lost on the way to the ball and ended up in a thrift store. He tilted his head. You look beautiful. Like a very angry swan. Sophie pointed a mascara wand at him. Do not start. We are going in, staying 45 minutes, humiliating my ex just by existing and leaving. No talking to rich people. No accepting drinks from strangers. And if anyone asks how we met, the official story is mutual friends and a mild concussion. Lucky nodded solemnly. I will tell them we bonded over shared trauma and coleslaw. It has a nice ring to it. Absolutely not. The engagement party was being held at the Willow Room, a venue so fancy the valet looked personally offended by Sophie's ancient Honda Civic. The second they walked in, the temperature dropped 10 degrees from pure social frost. Vanessa Hale, all perfect hair, designer dress, and the smile of a woman who had never once washed a dish, spotted them immediately. Her eyes flicked over Sophie's outfit, lingered on Lucky with brief interest, then returned to Sophie with the expression of someone who had just found gum on her shoe. Sophie Carter, she purred, loud enough for the nearby cluster of gleaming socialites to hear. You actually came. And you brought a date. How brave. Jake appeared at her side, looking smug enough to power a small city. Is this the famous husband? What's your name, man? Lucky smiled his soft, slightly vacant, completely sincere smile. Lucky Carter. It's new. I only got it 2 days ago. Before that I think I had a different one, but it got lost with the rest of my brain. A few people nearby choked on their champagne. Vanessa's smile turned razor-sharp. How sweet. And what do you do, Lucky? Lucky considered the question with the seriousness of a man being asked to solve climate change. I wash dishes. Sometimes I dry them too, if Sophie's in a good mood. Yesterday I learned how to flip a pancake without using a spatula. It only hit the ceiling twice. Jake laughed. Several of his friends joined in. Sophie's left eye started twitching. Vanessa leaned in, voice dripping with fake concern. You poor thing. Coming here in, that. Did you rent the dress, Sophie? Because I can still see the tag crease. Sophie opened her mouth to say something that would probably get her banned from polite society. Lucky spoke first. I think she looks perfect, he said, loud enough to cut through the chatter. Like someone who works hard and still showed up anyway. That's rarer than whatever that is. He pointed at Vanessa's necklace. Is that real? It looks heavy. Does your neck get tired? The silence that followed was so complete Sophie could hear the ice melting in someone's glass. Vanessa's face did something complicated. Jake's ears turned red. Before either of them could recover, a waiter appeared with a tray of wine glasses for the evening's blind tasting challenge, a tradition Jake had clearly planned so he could show off. Jake's eyes lit up with sudden, malicious inspiration. Tell you what, Lucky. Since you're new to all this, why don't you join the tasting? 20 glasses. Identify the vineyard, the year, and the region. Get them all right and I'll personally pay for Sophie's dress. Get even one wrong and you drink the special blend. He gestured to a dark glass at the end of the table that looked like it had been mixed by a cartoon villain. Sophie grabbed Lucky's arm. We are leaving. Right now. Lucky patted her hand. It's okay. I don't know why, but I think I used to do this a lot. Also, free dress money sounds useful. We still need a new toaster. The old one tried to bite me this morning. And then, to the absolute horror of everyone present, Lucky started tasting. He didn't swirl. He didn't sniff dramatically. He just took a sip, closed his eyes for half a second, and spoke. First growth Bordeaux. Pauillac. 2016, notes of graphite and someone compensating for a midlife crisis. Sip. Burgundy. Côte de Nuits. 2019, too young. Someone showing off. Sip. Napa Cabernet. 2018, over-oaked. Tastes like a boardroom trying to feel cultured. One after another. Perfectly. Casually. Like he was reading off a grocery list. The crowd went from amused to uneasy to dead silent. By the 18th glass, Jake looked like he was sweating through his expensive suit. By the 20th, a rare vintage so exclusive most of the guests had only ever seen pictures, Lucky tilted his head, took one small sip, and said, Blackwood Reserve. Limited run. Only 12 bottles. Tastes like power and poor decisions. Also a little bit like my head injury. He set the glass down gently. I believe that's all of them. Do we get the dress money in cash or check? Sophie prefers cash. The bank still looks at her funny. The silence was nuclear. Vanessa looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Jake looked like he was calculating how fast he could fake a medical emergency. Sophie was torn between wanting the floor to open up and swallow her, and wanting to climb Lucky like a tree. Lucky turned to her, eyes soft and a little worried. Did I do the thing wrong? Your face is doing the angry swan expression again. Sophie exhaled a laugh that was half hysteria. No. You did it terrifyingly right. Jake forced a brittle smile. Impressive. Really? Where did dishwasher learn all that? Lucky shrugged, completely earnest. I don't know. Maybe I used to be a very fancy dishwasher. Vanessa recovered first, voice tight. Well, this has been educational. But some of us have actual engagement photos to take. Try not to break anything on your way out, including your little fantasy. Lucky looked at Sophie. Can we leave now? I miss the diner. The diner doesn't have this many people pretending to like each other. Also, I think the valet is judging our car again. Sophie linked her arm through his, chin high, and smiled at Vanessa with all the sweetness of pure spite. Enjoy the rest of your party. Try not to choke on the superiority. As they walked out, Lucky leaned down and whispered, I don't remember much. But I'm pretty sure I just won something. Do I get a trophy? Or just the toaster money? Sophie squeezed his arm and, for the first time all night, genuinely smiled. Lucky, she said, I think you just became my favorite disaster. Behind them, the party resumed with the forced energy of people trying very hard to pretend nothing weird had happened. Somewhere in the corner, a waiter quietly poured this special blend down the sink. It had looked toxic anyway. The piece lasted exactly 11 days. 11 days of Lucky learning how to work the industrial dishwasher without flooding the kitchen. 11 days of him calling Sophie boss in a voice so sincere it made her want to throw a spatula at him. 11 days of Betty declaring that having a tall, handsome son-in-law who didn't talk back was better than winning the lottery, and significantly cheaper. On the 12th morning, the debt collectors arrived. There were 3 of them. The kind of men who looked like they bench-pressed motorcycles for fun and considered smiling a personal weakness. They filled the doorway of Carter's cozy diner like a very aggressive weather system. The lead one, a mountain of a man with a neck tattoo that simply said consequences, slammed a thick folder on the counter hard enough to make the salt shakers jump. Betty Carter, he growled. $150,000. Plus interest. Plus the emotional damage of having to come to a place that smells like syrup and poor decisions. Pay up. Today. Betty, who had been mid-pour on a coffee, went pale under her world's okayest mom sweatshirt. Sophie's stomach dropped through the floor and kept falling. They had been scraping by. The anniversary special promotion had helped, but not that much. Lucky, currently drying a stack of plates with the focused dedication of a man defusing a bomb, looked up. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely, as if inquiring about the weather. The lead collector looked him up and down, took in the too small flannel and the dish towel over his shoulder, and snorted. "Who's the pretty boy? New hire? Tell him to stay out of grown-up business." Lucky set the plate down carefully. "I'm the son-in-law, Lucky Carter. And I believe threatening my mother-in-law counts as my business." Sophie hissed, "Lucky, do not." But it was too late. The collectors were already laughing. One of them actually wiped a tear. "Son-in-law," the leader repeated. "Cute. Listen, dish boy. Unless you're hiding a winning lottery ticket in those jeans, sit down." Lucky tilted his head, considering. Then, with the same calm he used when deciding whether a pancake was ready to flip, he unfastened the watch from his wrist. The watch. The one that still looked ridiculously out of place against his flannel. The one Sophie had assumed was a cheap knockoff that had somehow survived the alley. He placed it on the counter between them like he was setting down a teacup. "This," he said mildly, "is worth approximately $500,000. You may hold it as collateral while we arrange payment. I would prefer it back in the same condition. It has sentimental value. I think. I'm not entirely sure, but it feels important." The laughter stopped so fast it left a vacuum. The lead collector picked up the watch like it might bite. He turned it over. His eyes flicked to the tiny engraving on the back, then to the serial number, then to his phone. He typed something. Stared. Typed again. The color slowly drained from his face until he looked like a man who had just realized he'd been rude to a tiger. "This is a Blackwood limited edition," he whispered. "One of 17 ever made. The last one that went to auction sold for dash," he swallowed. "You're serious?" Lucky nodded. "I don't joke about collateral. Or pancakes. Both are sacred." The three men exchanged glances that contained entire silent conversations about not wanting to die today. The leader cleared his throat, suddenly formal. "We'll verify. If this is real, you get 7 days. If it's fake dash," his voice tried to find its old menace and mostly failed. "We come back. And we won't be polite." "I would expect nothing less," Lucky said cheerfully. "Would you like a coffee for the road?" "On the house. You look like you take it black. Like your souls." Sophie made a strangled noise. The collectors left so fast they nearly took the door with them. The second the bell stopped jingling, Sophie rounded on Lucky. "Are you insane? That watch is the only thing you have that might help us find out who you are, and you just handed it to professional kneecap enthusiasts." Lucky blinked. "I didn't hand it over permanently. I leveraged it. There's a difference. Also, they were scaring Betty. I didn't like that." Her bacon slippers were trembling. Betty, who had been clutching the counter, suddenly lunged forward and hugged him so hard his ribs creaked. "My hero," she sniffled. "My tall, amnesiac, possibly criminal hero. You're never allowed to leave. I'm changing the will." "Sophie, stop looking at him like that. You'll scare the customers." Sophie was looking at him like she couldn't decide whether to kiss him or kill him. Possibly both. In either order. Lucky just smiled that soft, slightly vacant smile and said, "Does this mean I get extra bacon tomorrow?" "I feel like extra bacon is appropriate." Sophie put her face in her hands and laughed until she cried. The watch situation bought them time. It did not buy them peace. Word traveled fast in a town the size of Rivertown. By the next afternoon, the diner was packed with people who had suddenly developed a deep fascination with that quiet new guy who might be secretly rich. Lucky handled the attention the way he handled everything else, with polite confusion and an alarming willingness to help strangers carry their groceries to the car. Sophie watched him from the kitchen window one afternoon as he patiently explained to a group of teenagers that no, he did not remember being a spy, a prince, or the guy who invented the internet. But he did know how to get permanent marker off a plastic table if they needed tips. "He's going to get himself kidnapped," she muttered. Betty, flipping burgers with the energy of a woman half her age, snorted. "Kidnapped? Please." The man once apologized to a chair for bumping into it. Worst case scenario, the kidnappers end up in therapy. That night, the first real crack appeared. They were closing up. Sophie was counting the register. Lucky was sweeping with the focused intensity of someone trying to banish demons through floor cleanliness. Suddenly he stopped, broom mid-stroke, and stared at the far wall like it had personally offended him. Sophie. Yeah. I remember a boardroom. Glass walls. People in suits arguing about margins. Someone called me Ethan and I wanted to throw a stapler. He frowned. I don't know who Ethan is. But I don't think I liked him very much. Sophie set the cash down slowly. That's progress? Maybe? Lucky looked at her, eyes unusually serious. What if the person I used to be is terrible? What if I find out I was the kind of man who makes waiters cry and fires people on their birthdays? Sophie walked over, took the broom out of his hands, and flicked him lightly on the forehead. Then we'll teach the old you some manners. Or, better idea, we just keep the new you and tell the old one to get lost. New you makes excellent pancakes and hasn't once tried to explain cryptocurrency to me. That's already a win. Lucky's smile returned, softer this time. You're very good at this. At what? Making the scary things feel smaller. Before Sophie could come up with a sufficiently sarcastic response, Betty's voice drifted from the back apartment, followed by a loud thud. They found her on the floor of the tiny living room, conscious but gray-faced, one hand pressed to her chest. The next hour was a blur of panicked driving, fluorescent hospital lights, and a doctor who used words like stress-induced cardiac event and needs further tests, and she's been ignoring symptoms for months, hasn't she? Betty, already trying to sit up and demand they release her because the morning rush won't cook itself, waved them off. I'm fine. It's just gas. Or vibes. Or the universe testing me. Go home. Lucky, make sure Sophie eats. She gets mean when she's hungry. In the hallway outside Betty's room, Sophie leaned against the wall and tried very hard not to fall apart. Lucky stood beside her, close, but not touching, like he was waiting for permission. I don't know how to do this, she admitted quietly. Any of it. The diner. The bills. Her. You. Lucky was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I don't know how to be whoever I used to be. But I know how to stay. If you want me to. Sophie looked at him, this ridiculous, kind, possibly former billionaire man who had somehow become the most stable part of her chaos, and felt something dangerous and warm shift in her chest. Yeah, she said. I want you to. Somewhere in the city, a very expensive watch was being examined under a jeweler's loupe. A phone call was made. A name was spoken with sharp interest. Ethan Blackwood was no longer quite so missing. But in a small hospital hallway that smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee, Lucky Carter had never felt more found. The black car arrived on a Tuesday, which Sophie would later claim was the universe's way of proving it had a sick sense of humor. It was the kind of car that made the entire street look poorer just by existing. Sleek, silent, and so expensive it probably had its own stock portfolio. When the driver stepped out and opened the rear door, a man in a suit worth more than the diner's annual profit margin emerged, took one look through the front window, and froze like he'd been hit with a freeze ray set to existential dread. Inside, Lucky was mid-pancake flip, tongue slightly stuck out in concentration, wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the cook, but ask first," and a dollop of batter on his cheek. The suit-clad man pushed open the door so hard the little bell above it nearly had a heart attack. Mr. Blackwood, he whispered, like he was afraid the name itself might shatter. You're alive. Lucky turned, spatula still raised, and blinked at him with polite interest. I'm sorry, do I know you? You look like someone who irons his socks. I respect that. The man's eye twitched. I am Richard Langley, your executive assistant. You have been missing for 23 days. The board is in chaos. Your half-brother Victor has already begun positioning himself as interim CEO. And you. He gestured helplessly at the apron, the batter, the general aura of domestic contentment. You are making breakfast food. Sophie, who had been refilling napkin dispensers, slowly set the stack down. I'm sorry. Did you just call him Mr. Blackwood? Lucky tilted his head. Blackwood. That sounds familiar. Like something I used to sign at the bottom of very angry emails. He brightened. Is that my old name? It feels heavy. I prefer Lucky. It has better vibes. Also, it comes with free pancakes. Richard looked like he was aging in real time. Sir, with all due respect, you are Ethan Blackwood, heir to Blackwood Industries. You control a multinational conglomerate valued at dash. Does it have a dishwasher? Lucky interrupted. Because I've gotten very good at those. The industrial ones have a rhythm. It's almost musical if you ignore the existential screaming of the spray jets. Sophie pinched the bridge of her nose so hard she nearly lifted herself off the ground. Okay, pause. Everyone pause. You dash, she pointed at Richard. Start talking like a human person. And you dash, she pointed at Lucky. Stop looking at him like he's a new flavor of syrup. Richard straightened his already perfect tie. Miss Carter. Sophie Carter. His wife. The word hit Richard like a physical blow. He actually staggered. Wife. You got married. While suffering from amnesia. To a diner employee. Owner, Sophie corrected sharply. And temporary. Sort of. It's complicated. There was coleslaw involved. Lucky nodded helpfully. The coleslaw was very bonding. What followed was the most surreal 20 minutes of Sophie's life. Richard showed photos, documents, news articles about Ethan Blackwood's disappearance after a suspicious accident at a corporate retreat. Lucky studied each one with the same mild curiosity he gave to new pancake recipes. When he saw a picture of himself in a three-piece suit looking cold and faintly murderous, he frowned. I look like I hate joy, he observed. And possibly puppies. Was I unhappy? You were focused, Richard said carefully. Very focused. Lucky looked around the diner, at the chipped counter, the handwritten specials board, Betty, who had emerged from the back and was now openly eavesdropping while pretending to arrange pie slices, and finally at Sophie. I like this better, he said simply. The old me seems tired. And mean. And like he never got free coffee refills. Richard's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, went pale, and answered with the voice of a man walking to the gallows. Yes, Mr. Reginald. We've located him. He's stable. Mostly. There's been a development involving a marriage. A long pause. No, sir, I don't believe it's a fever dream. I'll bring him in. He hung up and looked at Lucky with something like desperation. Your grandfather is requesting your immediate return. There will be a board meeting. Security concerns. Medical evaluations. And Miss Hale has been very worried. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Miss Hale. As in Vanessa Hale. As in the woman who tried to make me drink poisoned wine at her engagement party to my ex. Lucky's expression darkened for the first time. I didn't like her. She had the eyes of someone who would trip an old lady and then blame the sidewalk. Richard coughed. Regardless. Sir, you need to come with me. Lucky wiped his hands on his apron, walked over to Sophie, and gently took both her hands in his still slightly sticky ones. I don't want to go, he said quietly. But I think if I don't, the angry suit people will just keep coming. And they might scare the regulars. Mrs. Henderson is very delicate before her second coffee. He squeezed her fingers. I'll come back. I promise. This is home now. Sophie wanted to argue. She wanted to chain him to the industrial mixer. Instead, she exhaled and muttered, if you get turned back into a joyless boardroom vampire, I'm filing for divorce and keeping the apron. Lucky smiled, soft and sure. Deal. As Richard led him toward the black car, Betty finally spoke up from behind the pie display. Tell your fancy grandfather that if he breaks my son-in-law, I'll come up there and reorganize his entire company alphabetically by spite. The car door closed. The street felt too quiet. Sophie stared at the empty space where Lucky had been and realized, with a sinking, traitorous feeling, that the diner already felt wrong without him. Ethan Blackwood's return to the Blackwood Tower was less triumphant homecoming and more very expensive hostage situation with better lighting. Within hours he had been poked by doctors, scanned by machines, debriefed by lawyers, and hugged, stiffly, by a grandfather who looked like he'd been carved out of old money and disapproval. Reginald Blackwood took one look at the batter, still faintly visible on his grandson's collar, and said, We will speak about the diner situation later. First, we stabilize the company. Victor has been busy. Victor Blackwood, half-brother and human embodiment of a nice smile, was waiting in the hallway with Vanessa Hale on his arm like a particularly venomous accessory. "Brother," Victor said, all white teeth and cold eyes. "You look domesticated." "How quaint." Vanessa stepped forward, eyes shining with manufactured relief. "Ethan, I've been so worried. When I heard you'd been living in some greasy spoon with a dash," her gaze flicked to the memory of Sophie, local girl, "I nearly fainted." Lucky, who was trying very hard to answer to Ethan and failing, blinked at her. "You tried to make my wife drink something suspicious at your party." "I remember that part. It made me want to introduce your shoes to a very deep puddle." Victor's smile tightened. Vanessa's eye twitched. The schemes began almost immediately. First came the medical pressure. Specialists who strongly suggested that continued contact with stressful, low-stimulation environments, translation, the diner, could hinder memory recovery. Then came the legal ones, quiet questions about the validity of a marriage conducted under amnesia. Then the social ones, a sudden flood of invitations to events where Vanessa just happened to be seated beside him, laughing too loudly at things he didn't say. Back in Rivertown, Sophie was fighting her own war. The diner had gotten popular after word spread that the mysterious dishwasher might be a missing billionaire. People came to stare. Some tried to interview her. One woman asked if Lucky's side of the bed was still warm and whether she could buy a used coffee mug for her Etsy shop. Betty, freshly discharged and banned from SALT, appointed herself head of Operation Keep Lucky Lucky. "We're making his favorite spicy soup every day," she declared. "The one that makes him do that little happy hum. If the rich people try to keep him, we'll weaponize nostalgia and sodium." Sophie was less optimistic. She kept replaying the way Lucky had looked at her before getting into that car, like he was memorizing her face in case someone tried to erase it. On the fourth night, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Sophie?" Lucky's voice was quiet, tired, and still somehow soft. "They took my apron. I asked for it back and a grown man looked like he might cry. Also, there's a woman here who keeps touching my arm and calling me darling like she's trying to summon a demon. I miss the dish pit." The dish pit never had agendas. Sophie sat on the roof of the diner, her official thinking spot, and looked at the stars. "Then come home." "I'm trying. But there's a board meeting and a very stern lawyer and my grandfather keeps saying words like legacy and duty, and please stop asking if the boardroom has a tip jar." A pause. "I remembered something else today. I used to hate the sound of my own name. Ethan. It felt like wearing someone else's shoes. Lucky fits better. Even if it started as a joke." Sophie's throat felt tight. "Yeah, it does." There was shouting in the background on his end. Someone calling for Mr. Blackwood. Lucky sighed. "I have to go. They're about to show me spreadsheets. I think spreadsheets are how the old me cried." Another pause, softer. "Save me a seat at the counter?" "Always." When the call ended, Sophie stayed on the roof a long time. Inside, Betty was humming and stirring a pot of aggressively spicy soup, occasionally muttering threats against anyone who tries to iron the fun out of my boy. Across the city, in a glass tower that smelled like money and quiet desperation, Lucky sat through another meeting, nodded at the right moments, and discreetly drew a tiny pancake in the corner of a very important document. The war for Ethan Blackwood had officially begun. But Lucky Carter had no intention of losing. The final showdown did not take place in a boardroom, a courtroom, or a dramatic rooftop in the rain. It took place at Carter's cozy diner during the Sunday rush, between the bottomless coffee refills and Mrs. Henderson's weekly complaint about the aggressive amount of cheese on her omelet. Victor Blackwood and Vanessa Hale arrived like a paired natural disaster in matching designer sunglasses. Victor had the tight smile of a man who had spent the last week failing upward. Vanessa had the energy of someone who had practiced her tragic fiancé face in the mirror until it stuck. They swept in just as Lucky, who still answered to both names depending on his mood, was behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, flipping pancakes with the focus of a man performing open-heart surgery. Victor didn't bother with greetings. Enough of this farce, Ethan. Grandfather has agreed to a private board vote this afternoon. You will attend. You will renounce this ridiculous marriage. And you will take your rightful place before I take it for you. Vanessa stepped forward, eyes shining with manufactured heartbreak. Ethan, darling. I've been so patient. But the media is starting to ask questions. About us. About the unfortunate photos from the hotel. If you don't come back and make this right, everyone will know what kind of man you really are. The diner went quiet. Even the coffee machine seemed to hold its breath. Lucky set down his spatula with careful precision. He looked at Victor, then at Vanessa, then at Sophie, who had emerged from the kitchen holding a spatula of her own like a weapon. I've remembered quite a lot these past few days, Lucky said mildly. For example, I remember that you he pointed at Victor, were the one who arranged the accident at the retreat. You paid the men. You told them to make sure I didn't get up. I also remember that you the spatula now pointed at Vanessa, drugged my drink the night you tried to trap me, and that the child you claimed was mine is actually his. He tilted his head toward Victor. Congratulations. The family resemblance is already unfortunate. Vanessa's face went white, then red, then a color not found in nature. Victor's hand twitched toward his pocket. Betty, who had been quietly refilling ketchup bottles, set one down with a decisive thump. All right, she said cheerfully. I've heard enough. Nobody threatens my son-in-law in my diner. Especially not while he's mid-pancake. Sophie, lock the door. Lucky, watch the bacon. Mama's got this. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as the most polite beatdown in Rivertown history. Betty Carter, 62, wearer of bacon slippers and wielder of a mean wooden spoon, advanced on Victor like a woman who had raised a daughter alone and once arm-wrestled a delivery driver over a shorted egg order. Victor, to his credit, tried to maintain dignity. Dignity lost. By the time the police arrived, called by a delighted Mrs. Henderson, who was filming everything, Victor was on the floor with a ketchup stain shaped like regret on his shirt, and Vanessa was being informed that blackmail, false pregnancy claims, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm were, in fact, frowned upon by the legal system. Reginald Blackwood arrived 20 minutes later, took one look at the scene, and pinched the bridge of his nose so hard he nearly lifted himself off the ground. I see, he said dryly. The diner has won. Lucky wiped his hands on his apron and stepped forward. Grandfather. I appreciate the empire. I do. But I don't want it the way the old me did. I'll help stabilize the company. I'll even wear a suit occasionally. But I live here. I flip pancakes here. I love a woman who threatens me with kitchen utensils here. And my name is Lucky. Ethan can come to the office on Tuesdays. Reginald studied him for a long moment. Then, shockingly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Tuesdays are acceptable, he said. But you will take a proper security detail. And, for the love of all that is holy, lose the apron when you enter the tower. It gives the board hives. Lucky's smile was brighter than the diner's neon sign. Deal. 3 months later, Carter's Cozy Diner had a second location, a waiting list, and a framed photo of Victor being escorted into a police car that Betty had hung next to the health inspection certificate with great pride. Betty's heart was stable. She credited the spicy soup and the daily joy of watching her daughter be embarrassingly in love. Sophie still refused to let Lucky buy her a new car. This one has character. And a dent shaped like destiny. And Lucky. Ethan Blackwood on paper, Lucky Carter everywhere it mattered, still woke up every morning like the world was a gift he hadn't expected to receive. On a quiet Thursday, as the lunch rush died down, he slid a plate of pancakes across the counter to Sophie and leaned on his elbows. I remembered one last thing today, he said. Sophie raised an eyebrow, already stealing a piece of his bacon. Yeah, I remembered that the old me never laughed with his whole chest. Never stayed up too late arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Never had someone look at him like he was worth more than the company. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, fingers gentle. I like this version better. Even if he still can't fold fitted sheets. Sophie tried to scowl. It didn't work. You're still an idiot. You're idiot, he corrected cheerfully. Unfortunately. Betty's voice floated from the kitchen. If you two are done being disgusting, the new intern just set a napkin dispenser on fire and I need backup. Lucky straightened, grabbed his spatula like a sword, and offered Sophie his free hand. Shall we, Mrs. Carter? Sophie took it, already laughing. After you, Mr. Lucky. Outside, the Carter and Blackwood breakfast empire, coming soon to a city near you, but not too near. We have standards. Sign glowed softly in the afternoon light. And somewhere in a very expensive office, a single sticky note remained on an otherwise pristine desk. It simply read, "Gone fishing. 4 pancakes. L." The end.
Make sure to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so you never miss a single update.